Thousands of years ago, the ancient Egyptians built some of the most extraordinary structures in human history. They raised enormous pyramids from the desert, moved stones weighing many tons, and created cities that survived for centuries. But even a civilization capable of reshaping stone could not create the one resource it depended on more than anything else: water. Beyond the narrow green corridor of the Nile lies the Sahara, one of the driest landscapes on Earth. An endless world of sand, rock, heat, and empty space. For most of Egypt's history, this desert has defined where people could live, where crops could grow, and where civilization could survive. From above, Egypt reveals an extraordinary contrast. Almost the entire country appears brown and yellow. And then suddenly, cutting through the desert from south to north, a thin green line appears: the Nile. For thousands of years, Egyptian life has been concentrated around this river. Farms, villages, roads, and enormous cities compete for space along the same narrow strip of fertile land. Where there is water, there is life. Where the water ends, the desert begins. Egypt was never truly short of land. It was short of land connected to reliable water. As the population grew, cities expanded beside farms, roads cut through agricultural areas, and new housing competed with fields. Pressure on the Nile Valley became more intense, and Egypt faced a question that sounded almost impossible. Instead of forcing more people and agriculture into the old Nile corridor, could water itself be moved into the desert? A major turning point came with the Aswan High Dam. Completed in 1970, the dam transformed the Nile in southern Egypt and created Lake Nasser, one of the country's most important water reservoirs. Decades later, Egyptian planners looked west of that enormous lake and imagined something far more ambitious. What if part of the Nile's water could be lifted out of the lake and carried deep into the Sahara? What if the desert did not have to remain empty forever? That vision became the Toshka project. At the heart of Toshka is a giant pumping station equipped with 24 pumps, designed to move roughly 25 million cubic meters of water every day. But simply moving water across the land was not enough. Before it could enter the canal network, the water had to be lifted about 50 meters to reach the desert plateau. Imagine the scale of that task. A vast volume of lake water raised day after day, year after year, as the foundation of a permanent agricultural system. The energy demand was enormous, with the system designed for a maximum power requirement of around 375 megawatts. Electricity became mechanical force. Mechanical force lifted the water, and the water began its journey into the Sahara. From the pumping station, water enters the Sheikh Zayed Canal, the backbone of the Toshka irrigation network. The main canal extends for roughly 70 kilometers before dividing into 4 major branches, creating a total network of around 250 kilometers. On a map, it almost looks like the birth of a new river, but this river does not exist because of nature. It exists because of engineering. The canal bottom is about 30 meters wide. Its depth can reach around 6 meters, and across the top, it may span close to 60 meters. Yet, building a massive canal through the desert creates another challenge. Water can disappear into the ground, so the base is compacted, stabilized, lined with a polyethylene membrane, and covered with concrete. Layer by layer, the system is engineered to reduce leakage. Because in a place this dry, every cubic meter matters. Then comes the transformation. Dry land is leveled, irrigation systems are installed, seeds enter the soil, and where there was once only sand, green rows begin to appear. Among all the crops, wheat has become one of the strongest symbols of this change. First comes planting, then irrigation, growth, ripening, and finally harvest. Modern machines cross fields that did not exist before, and golden wheat replaces empty desert. Water has become food. Engineering has become agriculture. Toshka is only one part of Egypt's larger ambition. Farther north, another project is attempting an even broader transformation. It is called the New Delta project. And unlike Toshka, which depends heavily on moving water from Lake Nasser, New Delta follows a different strategy. Instead of relying only on fresh Nile water, Egypt is trying to recover huge volumes of agricultural drainage water, treat it, and send it back into the desert for a second life. At the center of New Delta is what has often been described as an artificial river stretching roughly 114 kilometers across the desert. It is not a natural river, but a massive engineered water corridor made from open canals, underground pipelines, pumping stations, and treatment infrastructure. Its purpose is simple. Take water that would otherwise leave the agricultural system, clean it, move it west, and use it again to create new farmland. The scale is staggering. According to project figures, the wider New Delta development represents an investment of about $15 billion or roughly 800 billion Egyptian pounds. That money is not being spent on canals alone. It includes giant underground pipelines, pumping stations, roads, agricultural infrastructure, storage facilities, grain silos, and systems needed to support a new agricultural economy in the desert. The centerpiece of this recovery network is the Al Hammam treatment plant, designed to process approximately 7.5 million cubic meters of agricultural drainage water every day. Water is used once on farmland. Then, instead of being discarded, it is collected, transported, treated, and sent back into the desert to support another round of agriculture. Water that once seemed like waste becomes part of a second harvest. The idea behind New Delta is not to search for another Nile. It is to make the water Egypt already has work harder. But moving recovered water across the desert is not easy. Gravity alone cannot do all the work. So, as many as 19 major pumping stations are positioned across the system to keep water moving toward higher desert terrain. Huge electric pumps force water through channels and pipelines kilometer after kilometer, day after day. In that sense, New Delta is less like a natural river and more like a giant industrial machine designed to manufacture fertile land. If the pumps stop, the river stops. The planned scale is extraordinary. The wider development is intended to support more than 2.2 million fedans of agricultural land, covering roughly 9,000 square kilometers of desert territory. Imagine that transformation from above. Brown desert is divided into agricultural blocks. Roads appear, pipelines arrive, irrigation systems begin operating. Fields turn green, and then green turns to gold. Wheat, corn, vegetables, orchards, all growing on land that once produced almost nothing. And wheat matters more than almost any other crop in this story. Egypt is one of the world's major wheat consumers, and food imports place enormous pressure on the country's economy. That means a wheat field in the desert represents far more than agriculture. It represents food security. Every additional ton produced domestically can reduce the amount of grain that must be bought from international markets. This is why Toshka and New Delta are not only about making the desert green, they are about making Egypt more resilient. The most powerful moment comes at harvest. Combine harvesters move across enormous fields, grain pours into trucks, and silos receive the crop. But behind every field is an invisible chain of engineering. Irrigation networks, pumping stations, treatment plants, power systems, roads, and storage. A loaf of bread made from desert wheat begins long before the seed is planted. It begins with infrastructure. This is where Egypt's strategy becomes more sophisticated. The country is no longer thinking only about moving fresh water from one place to another. It is thinking about a cycle. Use the water, recover it, treat it, move it, and use it again. In a country this dry, the same water may need to serve more than one purpose before it finally leaves the system. Agricultural drainage water can be collected, treated, and redirected. Urban wastewater can be processed and reused. Reservoirs can balance supply and demand. Water is no longer seen as something consumed once. It becomes something that can be managed again and again. But the Sahara does not become passive simply because humans build canals and farms across it. The desert keeps moving. Wind pushes sand across roads, fields, and infrastructure. During stronger storms, sand can accumulate inside canals and around transport routes. Maintenance becomes permanent. One surprisingly simple response is trees. Rows of trees can act as living windbreaks, slowing the wind near the ground and reducing the amount of sand carried into infrastructure. In a system dominated by pumps and concrete, vegetation becomes another form of engineering. Farms also cannot function alone. They need roads, electricity, workers, transport, processing plants, storage, maintenance facilities, and housing. A field in the desert has little value if its crops cannot reach people and markets. That is why these projects are not simply agricultural schemes. They are development systems built almost from zero. This also explains the enormous cost. Creating farmland in an established river valley is one thing. Creating farmland in the middle of the desert means building nearly everything from scratch. Water infrastructure, electricity, pumping stations, roads, grain silos, processing facilities, housing, and transport networks all have to come first. According to figures associated with New Delta, the wider project represents an investment of roughly $15 billion. Construction accelerated from the early 2020s, and by May 2026, major parts of the system had entered operation alongside wheat harvesting in newly developed desert farmland. The broader build-out is expected to take roughly 5 to 7 years. But a megaproject like this is never truly finished the moment water starts flowing. A canal may open, a treatment plant may begin operating, and the first crops may be harvested, while thousands of hectares are still being prepared. Roads continue to expand. Irrigation networks continue to move deeper into the desert. The project grows in stages. First water, then land, then crops, then infrastructure, and finally communities. Supporters argue that the benefits could extend far beyond farming. The wider New Delta development has been promoted as a way to create large numbers of jobs across agriculture, construction, logistics, food processing, and transportation. Some projections range from roughly 2 million to 5 million employment opportunities, depending on how the wider development and supporting industries are counted. But numbers that large also reveal the true ambition. Egypt is not merely trying to irrigate empty land. It is trying to shift part of its economic activity and population growth away from the narrow Nile corridor. For thousands of years, Egypt's settlement pattern followed the Nile. Projects such as Toshka and New Delta challenge that ancient geography. They ask whether engineering can create entirely new centers of agriculture, employment, and settlement beyond the river itself. Of course, projects this large also create difficult questions. Billions of dollars must be invested before a desert field reaches full productivity. Pumps need electricity. Treatment plants require maintenance. Pipelines must be repaired. Canals must be cleaned. Roads must be maintained. And unlike a natural river, an artificial water network cannot simply flow on its own. It depends on infrastructure every hour of every day. Then there is the water itself. Reusing agricultural drainage water can reduce pressure on freshwater supplies. But treatment must remain reliable. Salt levels must be controlled. Soil conditions must be monitored. Irrigation must remain efficient. Turning desert into farmland is only the first challenge. Keeping that land productive for decades is much harder. There is also the economic question. Can the crops produced justify the enormous cost of creating and maintaining the system? Could the same money create greater benefits if invested in existing farmland? These questions do not make the projects meaningless. They show how difficult the calculation really is. Food security has value. Water security has value. Employment has value. Reducing dependence on imported grain has value. But all of those benefits must be weighed against billions of dollars in infrastructure and decades of operating costs. And there is one more reality Egypt cannot ignore. The Nile does not begin inside Egypt. Its waters connect multiple African countries, which means the future of large water projects is influenced not only by engineering and economics, but also by regional politics and the way Nile water is managed across borders. Water is both a natural resource and a political one. Seen together, Toshka and New Delta reveal two different versions of the same Egyptian ambition. Toshka shows what happens when enormous pumps lift water from Lake Nasser and send it through a man-made canal network into the western desert. New Delta shows what happens when agricultural drainage water is captured, treated on a gigantic scale, and sent through an artificial river toward new farmland. One project moves water from a reservoir, the other gives used agricultural water a second life. But both are trying to solve the same fundamental problem. Egypt has enormous amounts of land. What it does not have is enormous amounts of easily accessible water. So instead of waiting for fertile land to appear naturally, the country is trying to create the conditions needed to produce it. Pumps replace gravity. Concrete replaces natural riverbanks. Pipelines cross the desert. Treatment plants recover water. Electricity keeps artificial rivers moving. And eventually, combine harvesters cross wheat fields that did not exist a few years earlier. That is what makes these projects so extraordinary. They are not simply irrigation schemes. They are attempts to change the basic geography of one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. For thousands of years, Egypt was shaped by one river. The Nile decided where people lived, where cities grew, where food could be produced, and where the desert began. Now, Egypt is testing a radically different idea. What if the river no longer decides where agriculture ends? What if engineering can push that boundary farther west? 5 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, until empty desert becomes productive land. The New Delta artificial river stretches roughly 114 kilometers. Its treatment infrastructure can process millions of cubic meters of agricultural drainage water every day. Its pumps push that recovered water toward millions of fedans of potential farmland. And the wider project represents an investment measured in billions of dollars. But the most important number may not be its length, its cost, or even the amount of water it moves. The most important question is how long the transformation can last. Because engineering can bring water into the desert. Money can build canals. Machines can harvest wheat. But only intelligent water management can keep those fields alive. If Egypt succeeds, Toshka and New Delta may become more than agricultural projects. They may become the beginning of a second agricultural map of Egypt. One map created by the Nile, and another created by human engineering. Thousands of years ago, the Egyptians built monuments in the desert that still survive today. Now they are attempting something completely different. Not building stone monuments in the desert, but building life itself. And perhaps the greatest Egyptian megaproject of the 21st century will not be a pyramid. It will be a river that nature never created. If you enjoy stories about megaprojects, engineering, and the systems changing our planet, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see another project that looks almost impossible from the air, watch the next video.